You sense it before you ever have evidence. Something changed. Something became quiet. And now you are sitting there wondering whether you are imagining things or whether your instincts are actually picking up on something real. That feeling that keeps you awake at 3 in the morning. That strange distance that seemed to appear without warning. That look in their eyes that once made you feel like the only person who mattered, but now passes right through you as if you are invisible. Yes, that feeling. It may not be paranoia. It may be information. And today, we are going to uncover exactly what that information could be telling you. Because there is something people rarely want to admit. When someone with an avoidant attachment style has emotionally detached and started choosing somebody else, they usually do not announce it. They do not sit you down and explain everything. They do not write you a letter. Sometimes they do not even consciously admit the truth to themselves. Instead, their behavior changes in ways that are confusing, painful, and difficult to understand. And suddenly, you find yourself questioning everything, your judgment, your memories, even your own worth. So if you have been feeling that something is different, but you cannot quite explain what it is, stay here, because the clues are already there. They may have been there for a while. You simply needed someone to put them into words. And before we continue, pause for a moment. If any part of this feels strangely familiar, if something inside you is saying, yes, this is exactly what I have been noticing, write the word aware in the comments. Just one word. Aware. Because protecting your peace begins with understanding what you are actually facing. And if you are not subscribed yet, take a second and subscribe. The conversations on this channel are meant to help you understand yourself, recognize patterns, and stop accepting treatment that slowly breaks down your confidence. Now, let's get into it. First, we need to understand who we are really talking about when we describe someone with avoidant attachment. That understanding becomes the foundation for everything else. An avoidant person may have learned very early that depending on people was unsafe. Reaching for comfort may have brought rejection, disappointment, or emotional pain. So they adapted, they built walls, they learned to hide their needs. They learned that independence was safer than dependence. Somewhere along the way, they created an internal story. It sounds something like this: I do not really need anyone. I am safer on my own. People eventually disappoint you. Getting too close only gives someone the power to hurt you. And when that belief becomes deeply rooted, it can start operating underneath nearly every relationship they enter. This does not mean they have no emotions. In many cases, they feel extremely deeply. The problem is that those feelings can frighten them. Intimacy frightens them. Being vulnerable can feel like losing control. So they become highly skilled at creating emotional distance, especially when a relationship starts becoming serious. But here is where everything becomes complicated. When an avoidant person is connected to you, there can be a small window where they genuinely let you in. There are moments when they feel safe enough, comfortable enough, and interested enough to lower the walls. And that version of them can feel incredibly powerful. You see the person underneath the defenses and you think, there you are, this is the person I knew was in there. You begin holding on to those moments. You start building your hope around them. You remember the tenderness, the conversations, the eye contact, the moments when they seemed completely present. But because closeness can activate their fears, they may also remain alert for an escape route, not necessarily because they are heartless, not necessarily because they plan to hurt you. Their nervous system may simply associate too much intimacy with danger. Eventually, what once felt exciting can begin to feel restrictive. Familiarity can start feeling like pressure. And consciously or unconsciously, their attention may begin searching for something that feels different, something easier, something fresh, something that has not yet activated all of those fears around emotional closeness. And this is where another person can enter the picture. Now let me be clear. This does not mean every avoidant person cheats, lies, or replaces their partner. That would be an unfair assumption. What we are talking about is a recognizable behavioral pattern that can appear when someone has emotionally redirected their attention towards somebody else. They may have made a quiet internal choice that they are not ready to explain to you or even fully acknowledge to themselves. And once you understand the pattern, the signs become much easier to recognize. So let's look at the 4 major things an avoidant may do when they have already started choosing another woman over you. The first is this. They become emotionally unavailable and explain it by saying they are simply busy. This one confuses people because on the surface it sounds completely reasonable. Everyone gets busy. Work becomes stressful. Responsibilities pile up. Life gets complicated. So when they begin pulling away and say, "I just have a lot going on right now," your logical mind wants to believe them. You think, "Okay, I understand. I will give them some room." You wait. You become patient. You try not to make things harder. But emotional awareness teaches us to look beyond individual words and pay attention to patterns. Look at the frequency of contact. Look at the quality of attention. Look at what happens when they finally have free time, because those moments can reveal priorities more clearly than explanations ever will. Think about it. A person can genuinely be busy and still find 30 seconds to check in with someone who matters. Someone can have a terrible day and still send a simple message saying, "Today was rough, but I was thinking about you." Because when someone feels genuinely connected to you, your presence usually feels comforting rather than burdensome. But when their emotional attention has shifted somewhere else, the dynamic can change. You may stop feeling like a source of comfort and start feeling like another responsibility they need to manage. And the "I'm busy" explanation becomes incredibly convenient. The strange part is that it may not even be completely false. They really could be busy. The difference is that the lack of time suddenly seems to apply specifically to you. Somehow there is enough energy for other things, other people, and other priorities, but there is never quite enough left for the connection you are asking them to maintain. And this is where the confusion becomes painful. You finally bring it up. You say, "I feel like we have become distant lately," and they look genuinely surprised. "What do you mean?" "I have just been busy," or "You know how stressful things have been." Suddenly you are questioning yourself. Maybe you are asking for too much. Maybe you are being needy. Maybe you should be more understanding. So you step back. You stop asking. And they feel relief because the emotional pressure has disappeared. Then the distance grows even wider. Pay attention to this. When someone repeatedly becomes less available while expecting you to accept the explanation without examining the pattern, the behavior itself is telling you something. When a connection that once felt natural begins feeling like a task you have to manage, notice it. When you are constantly initiating, constantly explaining, and constantly convincing yourself that everything is probably fine, stop for a moment. Your discomfort may not be the enemy. It may be your awareness trying to alert you that something has changed. The second thing is even more painful. They stop fighting for the relationship and quietly allow you to do all the fighting instead. This one hurts because it can hide behind your greatest strengths, your ability to care, your loyalty, your patience, your willingness to keep showing up. You start believing that maybe if you love them a little harder, communicate a little better, give them more space, become more understanding, or become even more patient, you can repair whatever has gone wrong. But here is the difficult truth. Avoidant patterns can sometimes create a situation where one person keeps carrying the emotional weight while the other slowly releases their grip. And they may allow you to keep doing it because it makes everything easier. They do not have to initiate the painful conversation. They do not have to clearly say that their feelings have changed. They do not have to experience the full guilt of ending something themselves. Instead, they can become less responsive, less engaged, and less willing to repair while watching you work harder and harder to keep the connection alive. You start sending the first message. You start planning the conversations. You start asking what is wrong. You start apologizing even when you are not sure what you did. You become the one trying to restore the closeness they once helped create. And the more you chase the old version of the relationship, the easier it becomes for them to remain emotionally detached. But keep watching, because the next sign reveals why this dynamic can become so difficult to break. When someone is genuinely committed to a relationship, both people feel responsible for keeping it healthy. Both notice when something feels wrong and both make an effort to repair it. There is shared investment, shared concern, a sense that you are standing on the same side trying to protect the same connection. But when one person begins emotionally checking out, that balance disappears. Suddenly, you feel like you are rowing a boat alone while the other person has stopped touching the oars. You become exhausted and confused, wondering why they are not helping, while telling yourself that maybe they simply need more time. Maybe they are stressed. Maybe they will come back. But there is another layer to what happens here. Emotional triggers can sometimes overwhelm rational thinking and create an intense urge to react immediately. In your situation, that can look like anxiety. You feel desperate to repair things, to find the perfect words, to say something that will bring the old connection back. You replay conversations. You examine every message. You wonder what you could do differently. And even though that anxiety makes complete sense, it can unintentionally strengthen the very cycle you are trapped inside, because the pattern often becomes predictable. The more you pursue, the more they retreat. The harder you try to reconnect, the more pressure they experience. And then their retreat becomes what they use to justify even more retreat. They begin telling themselves that the relationship is too difficult, that you ask for too much, that they need something easier. In their mind, the other woman may begin to look lighter, simpler, more exciting, or less demanding. But there is something you need to recognize. They may be responding to a situation their own withdrawal helped create. You would not feel this anxious if the connection still felt secure. You would not be fighting this hard if they were fighting beside you. You would not constantly feel the need to prove your value if they were consistently showing you that you matter. So when you realize you are the only person initiating, planning, repairing, explaining, and reaching out, stop and look at the situation honestly. If every attempt to reconnect is answered with distance, indifference, or vague reassurance, you may no longer be participating in a mutual relationship. You may be trying to hold together something that the other person has already released. And yes, that realization can hurt deeply. But clarity is painful only for a moment. Confusion can drain you for years. Keep listening, because the next sign can reveal a change that is much easier to notice once you know what you are looking for. The third thing is that they suddenly become much more private with their phone, their schedule, and their personal world. Now, privacy itself is not a problem. Healthy relationships allow both people to have personal conversations, friendships, interests, and boundaries. Everyone deserves some space. That is not what we are talking about. We are talking about a noticeable change, a sudden shift from the behavior you have known for months or years. You have spent enough time with someone to understand their normal habits. You know how they usually use their phone. You know how openly they talk about their day. You know whether they naturally share their plans or keep things private. So when that familiar pattern suddenly changes, it deserves attention. That change is information. When someone begins investing emotional energy somewhere else, their private world can start becoming more protected. The phone that once stayed casually on the table may suddenly be turned over. They may start taking it everywhere. Conversations about their day become shorter. Details disappear. Simple questions receive vague answers. Plans become strangely uncertain. Cancellations happen more often, and the explanations may feel incomplete. But remember this, none of these behaviors automatically proves anything by itself. A phone being face down does not prove betrayal. A canceled plan does not prove another person exists. What matters is the cluster. It is the collection of changes happening at the same time. That is where the pattern becomes meaningful. When people feel guilty, conflicted, or protective of information they do not want exposed, they often become more careful about access. They create small barriers between themselves and uncomfortable questions. And someone who is already comfortable with emotional distance may be particularly skilled at maintaining those barriers. You may also notice that their defensiveness arrives much faster than before. A simple question that would once have received a normal answer suddenly produces irritation. You ask, "How was your day?" And somehow the question feels like an accusation to them. You ask where they have been, and you get, "Why are you asking so many questions?" There may even be a sharp tone for a second before they quickly calm down because they do not want an argument. But that brief flash matters. Not because it proves what they are hiding, but because it shows that something has changed inside the interaction. And this is where people often begin doubting themselves. Nothing has been openly confessed. Nothing obvious has been placed in front of you. So when you try to describe what you are noticing, you fear sounding jealous or insecure. You begin questioning your own instincts, but you do not need to become a detective. You do not need to gather evidence for a courtroom. You need to ask yourself a much more important question. How does this relationship feel from the inside? Do you feel safe? Do you feel respected? Do you feel included? Do you feel that the person beside you is emotionally present? Or do you constantly feel like you are standing outside a door that used to be open? If the answer is the second one, do not dismiss it simply because you cannot prove every detail. Your emotional experience matters. The fourth sign may be even more damaging because instead of simply creating distance, they begin turning you into the explanation for that distance. They start making you feel like you are the reason everything has become difficult. This can completely change the story inside your head. Suddenly, instead of asking why they have withdrawn, you are asking what is wrong with you. And that shift can be incredibly powerful. When someone has emotionally moved toward another person while still carrying commitments to you, they may experience an internal conflict. On some level, they know their behavior does not perfectly match what they promised or what they once wanted. That creates discomfort. And people naturally search for explanations that reduce that discomfort. So a story can slowly begin forming, a story where they are not abandoning something valuable. Instead, they are escaping something that was already broken, and somehow you become the reason it was broken. Slowly the language changes. You are too emotional. You need too much reassurance. You put too much pressure on the relationship. You are never satisfied. You have changed. Everything feels heavy around you. The relationship has been difficult for a long time. They have supposedly been unhappy for months, and now they have finally found something that feels easy, peaceful, exciting, or light. Notice how carefully this story can develop. It may not begin with one huge accusation. It may start with tiny comments, a sigh when you express a need, a dismissive look when you ask for reassurance, a sarcastic remark about something you care about, a repeated suggestion that you are somehow making the relationship harder than it needs to be. And the most dangerous part is that some of the criticism may contain a tiny piece of truth. Every relationship has disagreements. Every person has flaws. Everyone sometimes becomes emotional, demanding, tired, or frustrated. That is normal, but normal imperfections can be twisted into evidence that you are fundamentally the problem. And once you start believing that story, you may spend months trying to become a different person just to win back someone who has already emotionally stepped away. You begin thinking, if only I had been calmer, if only I had given more space, if only I had communicated differently. If only I had been easier to love, maybe they would have stayed. But listen carefully. A relationship is created by two people. Its problems are rarely the responsibility of one person alone. Healthy partners do not secretly build a case against each other. They ask, what can we both change? They communicate. They repair. They take responsibility for their side. They do not quietly withdraw while simultaneously directing all the blame toward the person they are leaving behind. And when someone suddenly needs you to carry all the blame for a distance they helped create, that tells you something important. It tells you that they may be trying to make their own choices easier to live with. They may be transferring the emotional weight of those choices onto you. They may want you to believe that their withdrawal happened because you were not enough, when the deeper issue may have nothing to do with your worth. And I need you to remember this part above everything else. Whatever flaws they are suddenly pointing out, whatever criticism they are repeating, whatever version of you they are focusing on right now, it does not erase your value. You can have things to improve and still deserve love. You can make mistakes and still deserve honesty. You can have emotional needs and still deserve respect. Someone choosing distance does not automatically mean you were the problem. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop trying to prove that you were worth staying for and start asking whether they were capable of giving you the kind of relationship you deserved in the first place. You deserve someone who intentionally chooses you again and again. Someone who can see your complicated sides, your imperfections, your strengths, your struggles, and the full reality of who you are, and still say, yes, I choose you. Not because you happened to be there, not because nobody else appeared, not because staying was easier than leaving, but because when they picture the life they want, they genuinely want you beside them. That should not feel like a luxury. It should be the foundation. It should be the starting point. And anything far below that is not something you should have to destroy yourself trying to earn. So what happens now? Where do you go after realizing all of this? What are you supposed to do with the truth once you finally see it? Because understanding a situation and knowing how to respond to it are two completely different things. I do not want you to walk away from this video carrying only sadness and recognition. I want you to leave with something useful, something that gives you back a little control. The first thing you need to understand is that you cannot repair this by constantly changing yourself. I know that can be difficult to accept because changing yourself feels controllable. You can tell yourself you will become less anxious, less emotional, less demanding, less sensitive, or less of whatever they have accused you of being. You can spend months examining yourself and trying to become a better version of who you are. Personal growth is valuable, and you should absolutely grow, but growth should never become a desperate strategy for convincing someone who is already emotionally withdrawn to return. Their unresolved relationship with intimacy, closeness, fear, and vulnerability is not something you created, and it is not something you can love out of them. Deep attachment patterns usually require honest personal work, patience, and a willingness from the person themselves to confront what they have spent years avoiding. You cannot force that process. You cannot persuade someone into emotional maturity simply because you love them enough. What you can control is your own response. You can learn to regulate what happens inside you when the attachment alarm starts screaming. This is where emotional self-regulation becomes incredibly important. It means noticing what you feel without immediately allowing that feeling to control your behavior. When anxiety takes over, everything feels urgent. You want to send another message. You want an explanation right now. You want to fix the misunderstanding. You start accepting things you normally would not accept. You make excuses for behavior that does not make sense. You convince yourself not to trust what you are clearly observing because facing the truth feels too painful. Regulation does not mean becoming cold. It does not mean pretending you do not care. It means creating enough space between your emotion and your reaction that you can choose wisely. It means sitting with uncertainty instead of immediately chasing relief. It means giving yourself time to observe the pattern before making a decision. Most importantly, it means offering yourself the same care, patience, and urgency that you have been giving to someone who may no longer be giving those things back. The second thing is to stop looking only at what the relationship could become and start examining what it actually is. This distinction can change everything Many people remain attached to potential.